Okay, so have you ever gotten into one of those arguments with a friend about what a song really means? Or, you're reading a poem and you're thinking, am I getting this right? Is this what the author actually intended? Well, in the mid 20th century, a group of thinkers came along with this totally revolutionary idea that changed how we read forever. They basically said, forget the author, forget history, and definitely forget your own feelings. The only thing that matters is the text itself. This was the super radical idea of new criticism, and it was a completely new way to look at literature. So let's break it all down. All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to take a quick trip back to the old world of literary analysis to see what this whole movement was fighting against. Then we'll get into its core principle: the text is absolutely everything. We'll also cover the two huge mistakes it warned everyone about. We'll open up the toolkit they used for analysis. And finally, we'll meet the revolutionaries who started it all. So let's kick things off with a question that really gets to the heart of all this. When you're reading a book, does what the author intended to say matter more than what the words on the page are actually doing? Just hang on to that thought, because that is the exact problem that new criticism set out to solve. To really get why new criticism was such a big deal, we've got to look at what it was rebelling against first. So what was the old way of doing things anyway? Before this whole revolution, literary analysis looked pretty much everywhere except the page. Seriously, critics would focus on the author's biography, the historical context, the moral of the story, or even just their own emotional reaction. The text itself wasn't really the main event. It was treated more like a window into the author's life, or just a vehicle for some lesson. But then, a totally new idea started to emerge. It was known as a formalist approach, because it focused on the form of the work itself. The argument was that a piece of literature isn't just a window into something else. It's a complete self-contained object, kind of like a sculpture, that you have to understand on its own terms. And boom, that's the core of new criticism right there. It treats a piece of writing like its own little universe. All the meaning you could ever need is right there on the page. In the words, the sentences, the structure. You don't need to go digging into the author's diary or a history textbook to figure it out. This is the mantra. This is the central command of the whole movement. If you remember just one thing, make it this. For the new critics, everything starts and ends with the words on the page. Everything else, it's just noise. It's a distraction. So, to build this new world that was totally focused on the text, the new critics first had to tear down the old ways of thinking. And they did this by pointing out two major errors in judgment, or as they called them, two great fallacies. Okay, so they identified two big don'ts. First up is the intentional fallacy. W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley came up with this, and it's basically the mistake of thinking the author's secret intention is the key. They argued that once a work is published, it's out in the world, it belongs to us. If an author meant for a poem to be happy, but it reads as sad, well, guess what? It's a sad poem. The second big don't is the affective fallacy. That's the mistake of judging a work by how it makes you feel. Your emotions are yours, they're personal, and they can't be the basis for an objective analysis. So, if you can't talk about the author and you can't talk about your feelings, what in the world can you talk about? Well, don't worry. The new critics developed a really powerful toolkit for analyzing the text on its own terms. Their master tool, the absolute foundation of everything, is close reading. Thinkers like I.A. Richards really champion this. It means you treat the text like a detective treats a crime scene. You examine every single word, every comma, every line break, looking for clues to see how all the pieces work together to create meaning. So, what were they looking for? Well, one of the big ones was paradox. A statement like, "I must be cruel only to be kind," from Hamlet. It sounds totally contradictory, right? But it actually holds a much deeper, more complex truth. For a new critic like Cleith Brooks, paradox wasn't a mistake. It was the very language of poetry, showing how literature could hold these messy, conflicting ideas together at the same time. And in that same vein, they absolutely celebrated ambiguity. You know when a word or a phrase can mean more than one thing at once? That's not sloppy writing. Oh no. For new critics, ambiguity is a feature, not a bug. It adds layers and layers of meaning and complexity, and that's what creates the richness that makes literature worth studying so closely in the first place. And all of this leads us to the idea of tension. The critic Alan Tate argued that the best literary works are held together by this amazing balance of opposing forces, like abstract ideas versus concrete images, or big themes of life versus death. It's this internal tug of war that gives a piece of writing its unified power. So when you start to see how all these elements, the paradox, the ambiguity, the tension, are all woven together, you start to realize something pretty profound. A work of literature is a complex, living thing. And the New Critics argued that trying to boil it down to a simple summary isn't just wrong, it's a kind of heresy. And they had a name for it, the heresy of paraphrase. Cleanth Brooks argued that the meaning of a poem is its form. The word choice, the rhyme, the rhythm, that's not just fancy decoration for an idea, that stuff is the idea. So trying to explain what a poem means in different words is basically to destroy it. The crucial point here is that how something is said is inseparable from what is said. Think about that next time you try to explain a great song. You're really only capturing its shadow, not its soul. So, who were the brains behind these powerful ideas? Let's meet the key figures who actually built this whole movement from the ground up. All right, let's connect the ideas to the people. John Crowe Ransom, he's the guy who literally gave the movement its name. We've already talked a bunch about Cleanth Brooks, the brilliant mind behind paradox and the heresy of paraphrase. I.A. Richards was the one who really pioneered close reading, and Wimsatt and Beardsley, of course, gave us those two big fallacies to avoid. We should also give a nod to the hugely influential poet T.S. Eliot, who gave them a key idea, that poetry should be impersonal, an escape from the author's own personality and feelings. And that brings us right back to today. I mean, new criticism was the king of the hill for decades, but now we live in a world where authors are basically brands. They're constantly on social media, sharing their thoughts, their politics, their intentions. So I'll lay you with this to chew on. Is the new critical ideal of reading only the text and totally ignoring the author and the outside world, is that even possible anymore? Or maybe, was it ever?